Welcome back to The Missing Link. I am your host, Authenticity. This is the last lesson in the second module, Cognitive Dissonance Theory. And this lesson is entitled The Big R. Now, I touched on in the previous lesson about resistance that we employ resistance to avoid rejection. Now, the big R that I'm referring to in the title of this lesson is in fact rejection. Now, an important shift that I'm going to give you in reference to rejection is in our self-rejection. And the truth that I uncovered that I'm passing on to you is that I learned to reject myself first in order to protect myself against others' rejection. And what I mean specifically by that is if I gave someone the ability to reject me, I don't know how forcefully they would reject me. But if I reject myself in my own way and by my own levels, I can control how much rejection I experience. So this is important to understand when it comes to rejection. We deploy resistance to avoid rejection. We learn to reject ourselves as a coping mechanism to keep self, because we don't know how much the external world will forcefully reject us. But what light or enlightenment this can shed on you from understanding this avoidance of rejection is that what you're actually unconsciously saying to yourself and the world is that you value someone else's opinion, outside opinion of you, more than you value your opinion of yourself. This is a powerful rule that I follow. I made a set of rules that I follow, and this is one of them, because when you understand this and more importantly embody this knowing that I can never value someone else's opinion of them, of myself, over my own opinion of myself, because just like I'm unconscious of this until I realize it, so are they. And if they're making me believe, or it seems as if they're judging me, or they don't see me as well or as fully as I see myself, then this is an important thing to understand, is that you cannot value outside opinions over your opinion of self. But anyway, I digress. Back to rejection. What happens with rejection is self-rejection, is that we end up rejecting ourselves, which was true on my journey. I rejected myself so frequently and so harshly that it became so painful that it couldn't keep that momentum. It was just too much. It's like the water on the other side of the dam. Finally, the dam breaks and the water just overruns everything. Well, this is true in my self-rejection. So, again, the important thing about rejection or self-rejection is that eventually it will end up ending the cycle on its own, because it gets to the point where it's so ridiculous that it has to stop. Just like inflation. Eventually, inflation gets so ridiculous that it cannot be sustained. It's the same with our inner inflation. And when we reject self so frequently, so consistently, it becomes an identity that we can't keep anymore. And this can actually trigger a rebirth or an awakening. Okay? This is the law of the universe, that eventually the laws work in our favor. Or actually, it's not personal. It's working in the favor of the evolution of human consciousness. But self-rejection is an important thing to understand on our journey and our climb of the mountain called me. Because we have to understand that the self we're rejecting cannot fully be us. And the fact is that we're defining ourselves when unconscious of other people's opinions of us that are operating from the same unconscious mind. And their judgments or perception of us is their own projections of their unconsciousness. This is important to understand. Now, I want to give you another insight in this module, which is of value all of its own. And I want you to think back to a point in your life where you chose to play it safe. And what I mean by playing it safe is when we actually identify that our true energies or our true expression is not going to be received well. So what do? We swallow it in and we give them the version that we're perceiving that they want from us. Now, I realize within myself, and you may be too, if you look back into one of these circumstances, that what ends up happening is when we choose to play it safe, this is always followed by a lull or a dip in our energy, which plays on the human level or the psyche level as a depression. When you understand this, you start to look into this another coping mechanism you develop to avoid rejection and ultimately abandonment, which we'll get into later. But you invented this mechanism to save you from being rejected. And what happens is we're avoiding pain, yes, by avoiding conflict and consequences, perhaps. However, the depression that follows from not being true and honoring ourselves is worse than the pain of trying to play it safe. Just take a couple seconds or even a minute and think about that. I want you to really dive into that and understand that you're trying to keep yourself safe and you may avoid some conflict and pain, but what follows is way worse than what you were trying to avoid. It's important in life when we find ourselves in these deep pits of rejection and even abandonment that we sit there and stay there consciously and realize in those moments that it's not so dangerous. It's not so life ending as if we're believing it into existence when we experience abandonment and rejection. It's the anticipation, like when we were younger and we did birthday punches and you're sitting there grimacing, waiting for you to receive that next punch. It's the anticipation that makes it worse than the actual punch you received. So, again, it is not safer to play it safe according to others' belief systems that are operating from an unconscious level. This is the key thing to understand on this level of the climb, which we will go into deeper levels as we climb higher up the mountain. But to understand it from this level of perception, where we're at the first plateau, if you will, it is not safer to choose and value others' opinions from their own unconscious belief systems about how things should and ought to be. That's understand that as a rule and implement that in your life. Now, another thing to understand, staying with this same inquiry, is that you have to understand that the walls you built of your self-image and even boundaries, which I don't believe with what others said about creating boundaries. Boundaries are actually walls that keep you in. I'm not talking about self-defense if somebody decides to take it on the physical level. Obviously, that's instinctual and we're going to defend ourselves towards survival. Our brain and our body is wired that way. But having a reputation or a mental image and then using boundaries to keep that real is a waste of energy, and it gets very tiring. That's that mental checklist I was talking about, just to be okay with self. Those type of boundaries do not need to exist. You need to give other people the free will to do what they want to do with how they perceive you or perceive themselves. That is none of your business. That being said, those walls do indeed keep pain out. But walls are not transparent. They keep you in. This is the key thing to understand. When you build those walls and create those boundaries, it may keep you safe, like in my previous understanding where I showed you it's not safe. It's not safer to choose to limit yourself to abide by someone else's belief system. That is not safe. You will end up experiencing worse on the outcome. So the walls that keep out the pain become your prison, your mental prison. And those walls actually trigger certain characters or personalities within self to come to the forefront and deploy their coping and defense mechanisms. Perhaps you can see that. Again, I'm not saying that you should make yourself a vulnerable target. I'm just showing you that on the level of mind, these things are a waste of energy. You cannot control someone else's perception. There's no need to defend their image of who they think you are. As you've seen, even your image of who you think you are is nonsense. It has nothing to do with your essential, true, authentic antiquity self. These are the games that we play on the human level. So, the walls that you built do in fact keep you a little safe. But there's a huge transfer of energy in the process, and it's a consequence that you may be seeing now from a different level that you don't want to do any further. And I don't blame you, because that can get very tiring of having to control not only your self perception, but the perceptions of those around you. Now you actually engage in that mind control I was talking about earlier, where you actually have to control other people's perception to mirror back to you who you are. That's the game that's being played in society the most. But I want you to really understand that a lot of the beliefs that keep you trapped within those walls are coming from people who don't even know themselves. They weren't even your original beliefs. They were things you experienced, and because you didn't have a mature sense of awareness that we must grow to have or rediscover, you didn't have that to say, wait a minute, no. Your perception of me is not true. Because my perception of me currently is not true. I'm still figuring this out. So that was the brainwashing that happened, that some of these core beliefs you may be holding on to currently in this moment, you might want to go through those, which there are processes that we'll go through to do that, but you might want to see now from this level we're stuck at until we go up to the next plateau, that some of the things that you may hold near and dear to your heart, your core beliefs that, they may not even be yours. They may have been things that you adopted just to fit in and fly under the radar in our families, schools, and churches. All these institutions that had specific sets of ways to behave, even emote. We couldn't show certain emotions in these environments, and that became self-depreciating. So, the purpose of this module, explaining the big R, I want you to understand, to summarize, that you're rejecting yourself first. Because everything in our lives mirrored back to us that our true self was out of control. The reason why it was perceived that way is because we were born into a very strict and structured society that doesn't, on purpose, it doesn't coincide with the laws or the truth of conscious beings. We'll get into the human later, but the human is a program. The being is the truth. The being of consciousness. What we were born into does not coincide with that, and there's a purpose, because when you rub two sticks together, you get fire. Well, the same thing is true. We had to have conflict to develop the urge to go beyond the structure and the conceptual nature that made us feel that when we looked past it, we were losing control. Well, remember, that control was implemented to bring us to the level of consciousness that could fit into the society. That is not how we start out. When we start out, we are emoting on a raw basis. You can watch an infant or a child go from 0 to 100 and back to 100 to 0. all the emotional spectrum without any ego or any identity trying to filter that out. This is what I mean by recovering your imagination, recovering your innocence. So we've covered a lot in this module, but I am supremely confident that if you understand the key points and you see the power that lies in them, the realizations, the perception shifts, the transformation that lies in these understandings, with specifically knowing self-rejection, and you're rejecting self because you learned the process of keeping you safe. But what lies at the other end of that pseudo-safeness is the bottom of the energetic laws, where you will reject yourself so much to the point where some people even choose to end their life. Suicide is a misunderstanding of the Trinity that I will discuss briefly now, but go into detail about. Body, mind, and spirit make up the Trinity in this model. The body and the mind will always want to survive. Spirit is beyond the physical. It is the awareness, the realization, the knowing of the many levels of existence. When a person commits suicide, they are actually doing it from spirit, because the body and the mind, okay, are created to do anything to survive. So I want you to understand that there is an ability to see beyond the human programs. Now, people, they choose the wrong thing. They choose to end their existence on the physical and mental levels. But here I am telling you that there's another level, and we can always perceive from this level, which we will learn going forward in these modules. But I want you to understand that you do and need to die, but you don't need to die physically. You need to die mentally. And I'm giving you and showing you that process. We need to die and kill the characters that were created because of other unconscious people that we formed into mirrors, and then their reflection became our self-perception. I want you to see the power in realizing that these people that you learned your ways from, or at least were influenced by, may be running the show in your mind. I'll see you in the next module.